AI thing wrong? It turns out yes, and maybe even worse than us. A new study looks at whether artificial personas, basically simulated humans, share the same cognitive biases we do. To create these artificial personas, the researchers asked the large language model to imagine there's some person with particular traits. The study tested four common biases: the halo effect, the anchoring bias, the in-group favoritism, and the false consensus bias. Let's break them down one by one. If I tell you Taylor volunteers to help feed children from low-income families, you'll probably think Taylor is a good guy. Now, if I tell you something else about him later, you're still likely to think of him in positive terms. That's the halo effect. Good traits spill over to unrelated judgments. This is what many studies with humans have shown. Now, using ChatGPT, the authors created 1,000 artificial personas with different ages, hobbies, traits, and jobs. Half were told Taylor volunteers. The other half that he invented a cake recipe. Then they rated his attractiveness, intelligence, and social and leadership skills. The results? The artificial personas who read about Taylor's good deed rated him higher on these traits, just like humans would. So artificial personas judge people just like us. But what happens when they have to make a random guess, say about the number of leaves on the oldest oak tree in Central Park, New York? Before giving their estimate, one half of the personas were asked if they thought it had more than 250,000 leaves. The other half if it had more than 750,000 lives. This tested the anchoring effect, where our judgment is influenced by the initial number we're given, regardless if it's high or low. And those who had higher number as a reference point gave higher estimates. But there was a limit to this bias. When the estimate was known, such as the attendees at Woodstock or the height of Mount Everest, the effect was much smaller or non existent. That makes sense because the large language models have access to this information. The anchoring bias only works when there is some uncertainty around the estimate. The halo effect and the anchoring bias are not related to our social identities. Would the social identities of the artificial personas bias their judgment? To examine this, the researchers looked at the in-group bias, our tendency to rate positively members of our own group and less positively members of the groups we do not belong to. The artificial personas were asked to imagine they were either a Republican or a Democrat. Taylor was also presented as either a Republican or a Democrat. If Taylor matched the artificial persona's politics, they rated him more positively. If not, they rated him more negatively. So artificial personas pick sides, but do they also think everyone else agrees with them? In other words, do they fall victims to the false consensus bias? Our tendency to think that others share our own values and opinions. The artificial personas were modified so that they identify with some groups such as recyclers, exercises, religious people, or Republicans. The researchers wanted to see if the artificial personas will project their identities to the wider population. Will the artificial persona who was a recycler believe that other people are recyclers too? And that's exactly what they found. The exerciser persona estimated that more people exercise than the persona who was not exerciser. The religious persona predicted that more people go to church than the persona who was not religious. And the Republican persona predicted that more people are in favor of stricter immigration policies compared to the persona who was not Republican. But the artificial personas in these studies weren't just biased. They were 2 to 3 times more biased than known human estimates. The artificial personas produced a caricature of human biases. Researchers are now discussing the pros and cons of using artificial personas like Taylor in research. For example, synthetic data may help to run pilot studies to see whether an effect is worth exploring further. But given how the artificial personas exaggerated the human biases, this may not be a smart decision. But the thing is, even if we decide not to use artificial personas in research, we may already be doing so. Many studies in psychology, management, and perhaps other fields rely on data obtained from crowdsourcing platforms. There are some concerns that bots are posing as participants on these platforms. These platforms are aware of this problem and are constantly trying to come up with safeguards, but it's kind of like a game of cat and mouse, with each side constantly trying to outsmart the other. Even if this problem gets eventually solved, there's still the problem of some participants on this platform acting like bots and showing minimal effort. Wait, that may actually be the bots. Do you think we should be using AI generated personas in research? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.